Audicratic audio.
So, let's start from not so far in the beginning, but I just wanted to ask you, what was like the first record, you heard or you bought with your own money that really sparked everything? Because I'm sure you could probably draw it back to maybe a moment, maybe it was a series of moments, but was there like a moment that you can remember
Yeah.
way back?
No, yeah, absolutely. So, I grew up listening to more of the classic rock and then hard rock. I had my best friend had an older brother who was into the Kiss, Judas Priest, Aerosmith, Iron Maiden, stuff like that. So in the, early '80s, things like that's what I was really into, as a kid, trying to grow my hair out long and growing up in, southeastern Massachusetts. And then I didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't but, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, so I would tape off the radio a lot. So I had, like, a little mini cheap boom box that had one speaker on one side and then the cassette. And, there was a college radio station. I wish I knew the call letters, but it was out of the Boston area. So it would come in, where I lived, which was probably about 45 minutes south of Boston, and, Sunday nights, coincidentally enough, and I would tape, and it would be a metal show. And that's where I first would hear some of the early, heavy stuff that I get into, whether it be Metallica or Accept or some of these bands that you weren't gonna hear on mainstream radio, or you weren't going to, see on MTV. So so anyway, I would tape these on Sunday nights, and, I had school the next morning, so a lot of times I would fall asleep, and it's kinda like you hear these stories of people falling asleep taping the Stretch and Bobbito show, right? So I'd have a 90-minute cassette, and I'd press record, and then somewhere along the way, I'd fall asleep. Well, coincidentally enough, the one week, at the end, whatever came after that metal show, I caught, like, the first 15 minutes, like, my tape kept going, and it was a hip hop show, and Sucker MCs by Run DMC kinda caught my ear. And up to that point, like, the only hip hop or rap I'd heard would be, the stuff that was, Blondie's Rapture or, Sugar Hill Gang, something like that, that was mainstream. And then, I caught that, Sucker MCs at the end of this tape that was playing, a bunch of heavy metal, and then boom, they transition, which is the beauty of college radio. You don't know what's gonna come next,
Right.
show to show. So that kinda grabbed me, and Sucker MCs, it didn't have the disco feel. It was just a drum machine and vocals, but it had the same kind of energy and attitude that the music that I was into at the time, and I felt it, and it grabbed me, and from there, I was like, "Alright, what is this?" So
Super
then I
hard
tried
drums.
to
Yeah.
Yeah, and so from there, I kinda had a foot in both, right? I was still sort of the metalhead kid, but, also kind of, figuring out what this rap music was at the time. Um, and then, yeah, so that was the first thing. So I probably didn't buy, if you talk about like what was the first thing I actually bought was probably, I don't know, maybe the paid in full cassette, something like that. I
Was
remember
that
there was this,
88 or was that?
yeah, something like that,
Yeah.
87, 88.
Yeah.
Um, because so growing up outside of basically on the border of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, there wasn't a lot of Boston was still pretty strict on hip hop shows. So you wouldn't get any tour that came around would hit Providence, it wouldn't hit Boston. So, like, when you start talking about the Fresh Fest tour or some of that old stuff with, Houdini and when Jermaine Dupri was a dancer, like, that would hit Providence, but it wouldn't hit Boston. Boston was still pretty racially tense. But Providence at their civic center, would have these hip hop shows, and even clubs would do shows that were rap music. And I was probably 15 minutes north of Providence. So, but the first rap show live, which then sparked my interest to buy things. In the fall of 1987, I entered in as a freshman at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic here in Troy, and I started working security at the RPI Houston Fieldhouse. So my freshman year, and I know there's a lot here to unpack, but my freshman year, I lived in a dorm right across from Troy High, and there were upperclassmen in that dorm, and I had long hair because I was a metalhead,
I think I remember
and
you posting pictures with the long hair, and I'm like,
yeah,
"Oh,
yeah, yeah, I had the mullet. I looked like
okay."
the drummer from Slayer. Like, I had the mullet, and it was bad. But it's my kids get a kick out of it. And so this upperclassman on the floor looked at me and he said, "Man, you look burnt." And he started calling me Toast. And so I had the nickname Toast before I was on the radio. So more people knew me as Toast than my real name, even before I started on the radio station. But that same upperclassman was in charge of student-run security at the field house. So the Houston field house, pre Times Union Center or whatever MVP arena, whatever the Knickerbocker, whatever the arena is called in Albany, before that, shows would play the RPI Fieldhouse. If they wanted a date within the Capital District, they would play the RPI Fieldhouse or the Glens Falls Civic Center. So this kid ran security for the students. So there was, grown men that would do security by the stage, and then everyone else was a student. And the one of the first shows I worked was the 1987 Def Jam tour that came to Troy, New York, and it was the last date of that tour. And it was just when I look back at it, as a person who had never seen a live rap show before, the first act on that bill was Public Enemy. So this is Public Enemy off of their first album, Yo Bum Rush the Show, and had never seen I'd heard rap on the radio, but I had never seen it live. And then out comes the S1Ws with the guns and Professor Griff and Terminator X, and there's Flavor with the clock, and he's run all over the stage like a madman. And there's Chuck D, sounding like with a booming Malcolm X type voice, and it was just like, holy cow! The energy on the stage was the same type of energy that, when I went to go see Metallica or Ozzy Osbourne or, one of these groups at Kiss that I had seen as a younger kid.
And this was the
Um,
first hip hop show for you at the time? Or
my
at least to
first
that
live
level?
hip hop show, and I was getting
Yeah.
paid to see it, right? I was working security, at the venue, and so that was like, holy cow, like, in that grabbed me by the throat, and then so juxtapose that, 8 people on stage for Public Enemy, and then the next act was Eric B. and Rakim. And, Eric B's just standing there behind the turntables, right? Not saying a word, not moving, and Rakim just center stage with his Dapper Dan suit, fat gold chains, microphone, and just commanding the crowd with just him by himself. No hype man, no S1Ws, no active DJ, just and so having those 2 perspectives and the energy in the crowd being into it and, so this was, Rakim, I think Follow the Leader may have just come out or was about to come out, um, and then it was Houdini, who were by then probably, the old men of the group, but still, you had 5 Minutes of Funk, and you had Friends, and you had some of those classic tracks that I liked, and then, like a teenage LL Cool J, headlining the event, and
Oh,
so
wow.
seeing that as my first live rap
It's
event,
incredible.
well, I mean, those are all Hall of Fame, candidates there for that, for rap music,
Of
and
course.
so then I bought, so then I was like all right, any money I had, I was down at Music Shack in Troy buying, whatever, whether it be the Colors soundtrack or whether it be, EPMD's first album. And then any show that would come, well, there weren't many that came to Troy from a rap standpoint. So it's not like I would see any in the area at that time. But when I would go home on break, I remember, seeing the Run's House tour for Run DMC, at the Providence Civic Center in Rhode Island, or seeing, LL Cool J on his Nitro tour, any major tour that would come through. Because back then there would be 5 or 6 acts on a bill because they were all under Rush management. So you would see EPMD with, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, and then Big Daddy Kane and Slick Rick, and all these legendary acts on one bill, in the start or in the middle of their career. So anyway, it was more of the seeing it live and kind of that really grabbed me and said, all right, this is something that has the same energy of the music that I grew up liking, but it's got a different feel to it. Um, and quite honestly, like, I didn't know half of what they were talking about, like, I didn't know what a 5 percenter was, and I didn't know who the, Farrakhan and all the, the vocal, snippets that would be between Public Enemy songs. I had no idea what any of that is as a white kid from the suburbs growing up. But, yeah, that really cemented my love for the music there, and then that kind of transitioned my way into, getting on the radio.
That's an amazing story to actually get in, like, first look at hip hop, and I don't know how much
Oh,
doesn't get much better than that. But before that even, were you actually buying, like, records, and were you really into music before that, or did it kind of
100%.
all stay
Yeah.
so you were even back before that, you were, like,
Yeah.
getting records and tapes and all that stuff as a kid?
So I was always the kid that had headphones on, and it was kind of like an escape, just the music. Like, I was always, whether I had a paper route or I was, even then, I probably cut 14 lawns, in the summer. Just people on my paper route and I always had headphones on. And those are the old headphones with the wire and the foam, things.
Right.
You're trying to crank them up loud over the noise of the lawnmower, which probably has to do with the tinnitus I have today. But just listening to anything, whether it be, classic rock on the radio or those tapes that I would, tape those college radio shows that were playing obscure things that weren't gonna be on, the Pix 106 type radio stations that we have. And then, when I was old enough to buy like a cassette Walkman and then, listen to those tapes that would, run through the batteries. But music was whenever I work, even now, if I'm doing some mindless work, the radio is always on. If I'm outside, I've always got something playing, in my office, I've got a turntable or, I just got a Bluetooth speaker, just kind of, listening to all that stuff. But yeah, music was very important growing up. I was the stereotypical kid that had the, 13 tapes from Columbia Record House for a penny and then never paid the bill, when they came back. So, getting,
Before my
Kiss
time.
Alive. Yeah, getting Kiss
Yeah.
Alive 1 and 2 and, Judas Priest and all those, so music was always big. And then because we didn't have a lot of money, just trading with friends, for all those types of things. But the hip hop really didn't start. I didn't jump both feet in until I came to Troy in early, late '87, fall of '87.